You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Sam Kean, author of The Bastard Brigade, the true story of the secret plot to stop the Nazi atomic bomb. Sam has written a number of books, and his first two books were national bestsellers, and both were named to the Amazon Top 5 Science Book of the Year. And a fun fact is that one of Sam's books appeared in an iPhone commercial. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, Sam, first off, I have to say personally, thank you very much for writing your books. Matt and I have two daughters who are biochemist majors, and I really cannot connect to that. But through your books, I at least have some understanding. So on a personal level, thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So how did you go about all the research, and how did you even come up with an idea about writing these books?
Well, I heard about, I think, one of the characters in the book, a guy named Mo Berg, professional baseball player turned assassin during World War II. And I thought it was just a kind of a fascinating story. I didn't know anything about him, hadn't heard of him. And then I looked into it a little bit more and realized he was part of a larger story, a larger plot to take on the German atomic bomb project during World War II. And there'd been some books about that, about the German atomic bomb project itself, sort of from the point of view of the Germans. But I realized no one had really told the story from the Americans' point of view. So I decided that I could write up that story. And so it was through one of the characters, and then sort of found out there were other characters in there that I thought were equally fascinating too.
Well, how long did it take to research a story like this?
Researching and writing was probably about 2 years, 2.5 years. And because it was really a character-driven book, I focused on basically doing a bunch of research for each of the characters individually. So, Mo Berg was one of them. There were a couple scientists. There was a soldier named Boris Pash. Joseph Kennedy, the older brother of President John F. Kennedy. So I could kind of go around, read up on each one, go to an archives where they stored their papers, had letters, unpublished documents, things like that, read up on it, and then kind of do all the research for one character at a time, essentially. So that's kind of how I did the research for the book.
Oh, that's interesting. So you focused on one character at a time. Okay.
Right, yeah. Because the characters, they do overlap to some degree, but in some sense they were kind of working parallel. So I was able to kind of do most of the research and look into one character. Then I could kind of be simultaneously researching and writing another character too.
Obviously, since you've written so many books, you have a system. How do you keep everything organized when you're writing?
Well, for me, basically, I just have a Word document with notes about each character and then just go through that and take notes on them. I don't think there's anything too sophisticated about it. It's a lot of, just going through all the papers, writing down, keeping careful notes, and then, just digging through the notes when I need them. One thing I do is I really try to immerse myself enough to the point where I could write an individual chapter or write, a segment of the story without notes. So I have all the details I need kind of in my head, and I think that helps me get out the main parts of the story. And then afterward, once I have that main part, or the main thrust, I should say, of the story out, then I can go back, use the notes to fill in some details, make sure I have all the facts correct, things like that. But basically, I want to have the story down in my head when I start writing it and not be constantly looking back and forth to the notes as I'm writing the story. I just kind of want that to flow out.
So you're actually studying your notes as you're making them, and then you go back and read them and keep up on them instead of just writing it down and coming back to it later. You actually make it part of you.
Yeah, I guess it's a process of writing all the notes out, taking very detailed notes, and sort of as I'm doing that, kind of thinking about, well, this would be a good introduction, this would be a good ending, that kind of stuff. But then actually, once I start writing, I just write it. I don't consult the notes while I'm writing the chapter out. And then I'll go back, double check, and say, oh, I forgot this little detail. I have to bring that in. But while I'm actually writing it, I do pretty much want to just go without the notes. I think it helps it flow better that way.
Oh, I would think so, instead of referring, and then it sounds probably more like a story and then somebody just restating facts.
Right, yeah.
So what about your daily process? Do you set a certain amount of time that you have to write, or is it just whenever you feel like this is a time for me to write?
No, I write every day, and
Okay.
I don't have a word count or a page number that I'm trying to hit, but usually, I'll spend, depends on the day, maybe 5 or 6 hours kind of going over writing, doing that stuff. If I'm really struggling that day, maybe I'll cut it down a little and do something else in the afternoon, but it's pretty consistent day by day.
And then also, obviously now, since you have many popular books written, the process has changed for you. Does it happen now that you just say, oh, I have an idea to write a book, and your publishing company says, great, you have free reign, or do you still have restrictions?
So the first step is I talk with my agent about it. We bounce some ideas around, and then we'll take a proposal to my publisher. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, we're really not feeling this idea, or, oh, yeah, we think this is a good idea, but why don't we bring this in, or why don't we focus more closely on this? So there's still a lot of negotiation going on with your editor, with your agent to some extent, about figuring out what the thrust of the book should be and what you want to include and not include in the book. So, yeah, it's not just, you send off a one-sentence summary and people are like, yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Well, what was it like getting an agent?
You pretty much need an agent nowadays in order to get published. So a publisher is not going to look at anything that's not coming from an agent. So an agent's the first step. And I've had the same agent since the beginning, before I wrote my first book.
Wow,
so
that's
I've
great.
been working with him for a while. Yep.
How did you go about finding him?
So one thing, and I've heard this tip, and I use this tip in this case, if you find a book that's similar to yours, so either a similar topic or a similar approach to a different subject, open up the book to the acknowledgments page, and a writer often thanks their agent by name. So then you can go to the agent and say, hey, I saw you represented this book. I want to do something similar or in a similar style. And that's a good way to, I guess, get their attention, because agents are sort of inundated with manuscripts, ideas. And if you can show that, hey, I know the type of work you do, I took a little bit more time, this isn't just a letter I'm sending out to bunches of people, that can help. So that's basically what I did. I found a book that had a similar approach to mine on a different subject, wrote my agent, said, I saw you represented this person, and I have this idea.
Excellent. Great.
We see that there's a younger reader edition of The Disappearing Spoon. So did you rewrite it, or did your publisher rewrite it? How did that work?
So my publisher came to me with the idea, wanted to do a young reader's version of Disappearing Spoon, my book about the periodic table. And they offered me the chance to rewrite it on my own, but I turned them down because I just felt like I was a little too close to the material. And it would be hard for me to kind of hack it down. I always find that process very difficult. I knew I would probably struggle to do it. And also there are other people out there who kind of specialize in young readers, and they'd probably have a better sense of, okay, this story will work well with that audience. This story, maybe not, so we should cut that. So they had someone else actually kind of hack the text down. And then after that, I went through, read it, made sure all the facts were correct, approved it essentially.
Oh, that's good. So you did get to read it in the end and approve it.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
definitely.
Yeah, I would think if after spending all that time writing The Disappearing Spoon, it would be hard to cut down a book that you had written, because everything that you had written, obviously, you think is very, very important for that book. And it makes sense to use somebody who might be a young reader expert to determine what would be best for that book.
Yeah, exactly. Again, you're just a little too close to the material. I think.
Yes.
But it sounds like a great idea to take a science book and a fun science book and aim it towards kids so that they're getting more excited about science at a younger age, instead of somebody who's, long out of school discovering your book and saying, hey, science is pretty cool, but it's too late for me now.
Well, it's never too late. I would never say that. My books are definitely pitched for general readers. So, I've had people who, haven't taken a science class in 40 or 50 years. And then they wrote me and said, wow, I never had a good memory of science before. So thank you for doing that.
That's me. That's me. And what I find interesting is that since you write about science as stories, about the people, it's easier for me to remember things also.
Yeah, so I think, the human brain just remembers information best when it's presented in a story form. So if you can, have heroes and villains in there and conflict and drama, I think that not only helps us remember it, but if there are some science parts in there, I think you're more motivated to kind of get through those parts if you know there's going to be a payoff with how the story that you care about is going to turn out.
Scribble File is the proud sponsor of the Author Inside You podcast.
Looking for ways to improve your writing? Scribble File is the place for you. They're famous for giving out detailed and helpful critiques. The critiques are so much more than just giving each other a pat on the back. You'll actually receive information that will help you improve your writing. As part of their community, you'll be writing critiques for others also. Their members tell them again and again that learning how to write great critiques dramatically improve their own writing.
At Scribble File, you can learn from the vast collection of free writing resources. Besides the insightful critiques you'll get in the writing workshop, Scribble File has a huge amount of free resources in the professional writing blog and writing academy. Their writing forums are busy with thousands of writers from all over the world talking shop.
Scribble File is also a great place to make lifelong friends in the busy community of writers. Although writing is a solitary act, that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribble File every day. And they're really a friendly bunch.
You've never seen a writing group like this one at scribblefile.com. Well, Sam, talking about writing style, what kind of advice would you give somebody who's working on a book now and they're not quite finished with it, or they need some motivation?
Well, I would try to remember why you kind of got into it in the first place. What about the story really captivated you? Why did you feel it's important to tell this story? I think that's probably a good goal in general if you're ever feeling a little, sluggish or burned out, is just remember why you got into it in the first place. Like, what really motivated you? Was it, just the feeling that the story needed to be told? Was it, that you'd always loved books and wanted to do one of your own, and try to sort of capture that feeling?
Great.
Well, what motivated you to write your books?
I'd always been a big reader, and the idea of being a writer, I think, definitely appealed to me. But I also studied science in college. I was a physics major, and I love science. I think it's a fascinating field. And I wanted to be a part of science. I wanted to keep learning about science, even if I wasn't necessarily in the lab all the time and, actually sort of doing the experiments and things like that. So it was the chance to be a writer, but also the chance to keep learning about a field that I really loved.
Great. So, Sam, what kind of things are you doing to promote your book?
I worked on a podcast series that was sort of a spin-off from the book, so I helped write the scripts for that. I ran some excerpts in different, magazines and online places. I've been promoting it on Twitter and Facebook, different things like that. And then kind of working behind the scenes with people in my publishing house who were, reaching out to people, trying to reach out to teachers. A lot of teachers have used the books in their classrooms in different ways. So trying to reach out to teachers, educators, people like that.
Excellent. So what's the name of the podcast?
The podcast that I wrote for is called American History Tellers, and they basically did an adaptation where we took a few of the stories in the book and adapted them for audio.
Oh, great. Well, I'll put a link to that in our show notes. Since we're on a podcast, maybe people will click over and check those out.
Yeah, and it was fun to do. So they have a kind of an unusual style in that they basically have scenes. So they're kind of fictionalized or dramatized scenes, which is something you can't do in a nonfiction book, put words in characters' mouths and things. But they have these fictionalized scenes where they say, imagine it's 1944 and you're in Europe or something. So it was fun to write that. It's a little different writing style, and it's just a little something they do that I think is kind of fun.
And then I guess you have to collaborate with them also. So that is interesting too, right? Collaborating with a team.
Yeah, it's so there are just a couple other editors there. I'm not really involved as much in the sound design part, so I didn't get too much into that. But I was, suggesting background noises and special sound effects and things like that. So it was kind of fun to do.
Yeah, I bet it was. That's great. One of the things we try to do to encourage people to write the books is you do not know what opportunities will come because of this book. And it sounds like the opportunities have been very, very good for you.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I never really thought about the speaking side of things. I never really considered, writing for a podcast or anything like that. Sure. But it has really opened up those chances. It's been fun.
So in the beginning, were you scared?
Yeah, I mean, you're always nervous about how a book is going to be received. So I don't think I was terrified, I wouldn't say. But yeah, you're definitely nervous about the reception it's going to get, whether you're going to, reach people, things like that. So yeah, there are definitely nerves involved.
Sam, how would be a good way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
There are a few ways. I have a website. It is samkean.com, just SAMKEAN.com. And there's a page there where you can get in touch with me or book me as a speaker or something like that. I'm also on Facebook through Sam Kean Books and through Twitter. It's at Sam_Kean.
Okay.
Excellent. I'll put those in the show notes. Excellent.
Well, Sam, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. It was great talking to you. Thanks, Sam.
Our email list has been growing since we first started the Author Inside You podcast.
And if you'd like to join our email list, just go to theauthorInsideYou.com and click on Contact.
Until next time.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.